Good evening, dear students. You are welcome to the first topic of CRP Principles of Crop Protection. And in this first topic, we are going to be treating definitions of pests. I'm going to be defining pests in four different ways, and then we'll be talking about the importance of pests. Also, we'll be talking about economic threshold, the concept of economic threshold, and we'll go further to categorize pests. So we'll be speaking about pests in different categories. I promise that this topic is going to be interesting, and as you follow along, I want to take your notes, and I want you to meet me at the discussion forum. I'll be giving you some class activities in between, and I hope that you are going to make use of the best of it. Thank you. Welcome once again. Like I said in the introductory video, my name is Yetunde Alawode, and my email address is yalawode@noun.edu.ng. Of introduction, we want to be defining pests, and the definition of crop pest is usually in terms of the degree and importance of crop damage or loss. So you define pests according to the level of crop damage or loss. And you can also define pests depending on the individuals and the prevailing conditions. So, having said this, we shall be talking about our first definition of pest. And here we have a pest is any animal or plant which harms or causes damage to man, his crops, animals, or possessions, or even just causes him annoyance. So that's the first definition of pest. So pests are not only animals, they could be plants, and they do not only damage man, cause damage to man, they cause damages to his crops, his animals, his possessions, or even just causing annoyance. So that is the first definition. Moving on to the second, a pest is an organism when the level of damage it causes is sufficient to warrant control measures. Any organism is called a pest when you see the level of damage and then you try and control it. When you are talking of a very dangerous pest, we are talking of a pest that causes a lot of damage. For example, uh, mosquitoes. They come around, bite, and they come in their numbers. And then usually you get a form of pesticide or a form of spray, insecticide, and then you use it to control them. So an organism is a pest when the level of damage it causes is sufficient to warrant control measures. That's the second definition. Third slide, we have a pest is any form of plant or animal or pathological agent injurious or potentially injurious to plant or plant products, livestock, or man. So this definition is getting more and more complex. A pest is any form of plant, okay, or animal or pathological agent. When we're talking of pathological, we are talking of disease carrying agents. Most of these pests are vectors of all manner of diseases. So when these pests now carry these diseases that cause injury to man, his plant or livestock, then you can call that a pest. So that is the third definition. The fourth definition now is a pest is any organism detrimental to man, whether it is an insect, disease, organism, weed, rodent, or any other. Alright? You can see from the picture here, these are pests invading this particular crop. They may be tiny, they may be big, it doesn't even depend on their size. Some of them may even be so tiny, maybe behind the leaves, and they are causing serious damage. Okay, so any organism that is detrimental to man, whether it is an insect, a disease, organism, weed, rodent, or any other, then it is called a pest. So why is pest very important? Why do we have to take time to study pests? In Africa, generally the yield of crops are low. Okay, crop productivity in most of Africa is generally low, and reason being that these losses come from pests and diseases. All right, that is why the study of pests is very, very important, because crop productivity in Africa is generally low, and this is due to losses from pests and diseases. Therefore, the reduction of losses due to pests and diseases is an important element in increasing the efficiency of crop production. If you want a high yield in your crop, then you have to know how to control your pests and diseases. And also, pests don't only occur on the crop, they also occur in storage. So it's important that all the stages of harvest to production, storage, processing, everything have all these stages have their different forms of pests. So they must all be controlled. Now, why is it that pests are prevalent? Why is it that pests we see them anywhere? Well, what are the conditions that promote pests? So over here there are two major conditions which promote pests, and the first one is the favorable climatic conditions, and the second condition is the biological change. So we have two major conditions which promote pests. We have the favorable climatic conditions, and then we have the biological change. Talking about the favorable climatic conditions now, we're talking about conditions that make pests to increase in number, and these include temperature, humidity, rainfall, and sunlight. When the temperature is optimum, not too high, not too low, then you have a lot of pests. Their breathing cycle becomes very, very active, and they just multiply. When there is humidity in the air, when the air is humid, then you have a lot of pests. That is why you normally have a lot of pests towards the south side of Nigeria than the north side, because of the humid climatic condition. Then rainfall is also important for the increase of pests. If you have optimum rainfall, normal rainfall, if the rainfall is okay, then these pests tend to multiply. And an example of this kind of pest is the aphid gossipy, or the cotton aphid. Now talking about biological change, we have biological change in different forms. The first one we'll be talking about is the change in cultural practices. When you plant your crops on the farm, there are certain things you do to them, culture that we call cultural practices. For example, in monocultures, when you talk of monocultures, you're talking of planting one specific kind of plant year in, year out. That is what we call monoculture. So, for example, now the monoculture represents a concentration of plants of the same species over a wide area, and this is beneficial to the insect or organism, which will thereby have little difficulty in finding its host plant. When you have the same crops everywhere over a very large expanse of land, then these pests don't need to be looking around for the crops, they just come there and then they invade such kind of field. So that's talking about the change in cultural practices. So that is why it's always good to practice more of this mixed farming or mixed cropping, or better still, crop rotation. By then, you kind of tend to confuse this pest. A form of biological change is the change in the character of the food supply. Okay, this is also very important because plants grow for agriculture have normally been selected for their nutritive value, okay, and therefore more attractive to pets than their wild relatives. When you select a plant, for example, most of the staple crops that are grown in Nigeria, your rice, the beans, they usually have high nutritive value, and this is what these pets actually want. Okay, so they tend to near come to crops that have high nutritive value that is being planted. For example, the sugar in sorghum and maize is high such that they attract pests, and um, the attraction to pests is higher than to the wild grasses. Another form of biological change is the introduction to new environments. Most pests, insect pests are being brought into the country, and that is why the quarantine arm of disease control is very important. They're always at the airport, they're always at point of entry, so that when people come in, they check whatever you bring in form of plants or animals, and then they check and see if those things do not carry pests into the country, because it's very important. Most of the pests are being brought in by other people, and when they enter the country, they just come and they just multiply and they become a nuisance. And a very, very good example is the cotton cushion scale. It's a native of Australia but was introduced into California in 1868. So that is what introduction to new environment is all about. Biological change still, we're talking about the climate in host or natural enemy relationships. All right. The application of pesticides on a large scale in agricultural operations generally affect natural enemies. Normally you use some insects to control other insects. So when you are using pesticides on a large scale, you even tend to kill the insects that are supposed to be beneficial to you. So that is why it's important to note that your use of pesticides should be well calculated so that you will not even destroy the insects that are even supposed to be feeding on other insects. For example, the giant cooper is a minor pest, so it doesn't need to be disturbed. And once you use pesticide on them, you tend to destroy them even with the host pest. Talking about biological change still, another point is the loss of competing species. And still under monoculture conditions, there are fewer insect species than under natural conditions. Okay, and many species now become pests, which were not pests under natural conditions because of the monoculture that is in place, you know, because that is only what they can eat. So it tends to come there and then destroy the whole place. All right, another form of change is the economic change, and it's important to note that a pest may arise purely for economic reasons, right? Because of a change in the value of a crop. Okay, when pests destroy the crop, they destroy the economic part of the crop. For example, vegetables, the economic part of the crop is vegetables in the leaf. Once the pests come and destroy the leaf, then it doesn't bring in much price like it's supposed to bring in. The yield is low, and the people that want to buy it, when they see all the leaves that have been eaten and brittle, it doesn't command more price. So damage that is not serious when the prices are low can be important when the prices are high. Yes. So for this reason, you have to keep checking the rate at which these organisms go, so that you try and check for the damages that is caused, because some damages are not usually so serious. So that is talking about economic change. Now, having said that, we have defined pests in four different ways. We have stated why pests are important to learn or to know about. And we have explained the two major conditions which test which promote pests. So this is a short class activity that I want you to do, and I'll just give you 10 seconds to just quickly do it. Good. So now we'll be taking another new topic, and that will be economic threshold. What does economic threshold mean? Okay, this is the population density at which control measures should be applied to prevent an increasing pest population from reaching economic injury level. All this is trying to say is that when you have a field or you have crops on the field and the pests invade the crops, definitely as a farmer, you're going to use your pesticides to control it. But you should be able to check first and see the level at which the damage has been done before you can know the control measure to use, so that you don't waste your money at the end of the day and spend on buying control measures or pesticides or what have you to control the pest. And then at the end of the day, by the time you subtract your money, the money you have spent on pesticide from the yield, the money you got from the yield, you just get nothing. So economic threshold is talking about the population density at which to control your pests and diseases and prevent them from reaching economic injury level. You can also define economic threshold as the population level of the organisms or level of disease incidence above which economically significant damage or loss is caused and below which damage or loss is negligible. It's not all damage that leads to low yield. Okay, some damage are so little and so negligible, so you don't need to be wasting pesticides or control measures on your crops. So you should be able to study when you go to the farm, you look around. How how much is the damage that is done? What kind of control measure will I use that will not drain my pocket as a farmer? These are the things that bring about economic threshold. It can also be defined as the population level at which it will pay the farmer to control his pests and below which is uneconomical. Just the same thing that I've been saying since. And what is the concept of economic threshold? Okay, so the concept of economic threshold is based on the fact that organisms over a long period of time and in a relatively undisturbed environment reach a state of its equilibrium with their environment. What they are trying to say is that when an insect comes to a farm and it keeps producing, it gets to a stage when it is not disturbed by all these conditions we have been talking about in the previous slides. It reaches a point whereby it just the population will just begin to reduce drastically. So that is the concept of economic threshold. And it is also a dynamic state of equilibrium, which means that although population densities vary from season to season, year to year, place to place, for a particular place, there is an average population. For those people that want to specialize in um, insects or pathology, you know that these insects usually have um, certain state, a dynamic state of equilibrium. Okay, and these insects vary from season to season, year to year. The kind of insect you find in dry season is not the one you find in wet season. From year to year, from place to place, the kind of insect you find in America is not the kind of insect you find in Nigeria here. So it's a dynamic state of equilibrium. Okay, it's important to note that. And also is a level at which is reasonably stable over a long period of time. So you are talking of stability over a long period of time. Now, based on this economic threshold that we have been talking about, we can categorize pests. Alright, we can categorize pests based on the economic level or the concept of economic threshold. Okay, so therefore, pests are categorized as follows. Class of pests is the key pests. You can call them key pests, or you can call them major pests, or you can call them regular pests. They are usually perennial pests. When you talk of perennial, you're talking of yearly. They come year in, year out, and they cause serious and persistent economic damage in the absence of effective control measures. So these pests are usually key. They are major. They come in, year out, and they cause a lot of damage. So you have to control them effectively. The population of the damaging stage stand above economic injury level. You know, because the damage is usually very, very devastating. So an example of this is the variegated grasshopper or the Zoonoceros variegatus. So in this picture here, you can see a swarm of locusts or grasshopper rather. You know, whenever they come like a dark cloud. They come and feast on all the crops. Everything green is being wiped away. So it's usually a very devastating moment. So they cause very serious injury or damage, and that's why they are called major pests. Another class of pests is the minor pests, and in this case, some organisms cause economic damage only under certain circumstances in their local environment, okay? Only under certain circumstances in their local environment. So they are usually not a threat, okay? So under normal conditions, their populations are low and the damage they cause is insignificant, okay? They are not usually a threat, they are not like the major pests, they are just below economic damage, and their damage is usually insignificant. A good example of it is the pod husk minor or Mammara species. It is a minor pest of cocoa both in Nigeria and Ghana. Another type of pest we'll be talking about, another category of pest is the occasional pest. Alright, and occasional, just like the name, the populations are normally below economic threshold level, but occasionally, once in a while, it rises above the economic threshold level. And for example, we have the stem borer, like in this picture, you can see this is what the stem borer looks like of cocoa, you know. So it causes damage to crops occasionally. So that is an example of occasional pest. Another category of pests is the potential pests. Okay, potential pests are those species whose population level are usually far below the economic threshold but can become highly injurious under changed cultural practices or as introduced pests. So these are the things that make them to rise above economic threshold. That's the change cultural practices when you keep changing your cultural practices or when they are introduced into another environment. Then this is when these potential pests become highly injurious. So they have the potential to become injurious, but normally they are they are um, they are not a threat. An example of this is a giant looper, and you can see in this picture this is what a giant looper looks like. So this is an example of a potential pest. Now we'll be talking about another category of pests called the migrant pests. Just like their name, they move from one area to another to cause damage in crops. Okay, they leave their area, they go to another area and cause damage. They are a special group of pests that are classified as migrant pests. Their control is normally um, between international cooperation between membership countries that are affected. okay, because they can move from here to Ghana, for example, because Ghana is close to us, to Niger. They can move here, and go and cause damages there. So, therefore, they migrate to cause damage. And when you want to control them, you cannot just control them in your country alone, because they can come from other places to your country. So you control them collectively, you know, among members of the countries that are affected. And a good example of this migratory pest is the African migratory locust. And this is exactly what it looks like in the picture. So that is about the migrant pest. Okay, having said that, we have learned from the beginning of this lecture, we learned how to define pest in four different ways. We learned the importance of pest, and we learned the conditions that promote the that promote pest. And also we went to talk about economic threshold. Okay, also, we talked about um, the categories of pests according to the economic threshold. So this is another class activity for you. And the first question is define economic threshold in three ways. Second question, what is the concept of economic threshold? And third question, list and explain the categories of pests. I'll give you just 10 seconds to just answer it on your own. So having said that, we now come to the end of the first topic of CRP 303 crop protection, and I hope you had a very educative session. I'll see you next week with the next topic, talking about how to control these pests. Because we have talked about what you now know what pests are, you know the importance of pests, you know the categories of pests and what economic threshold is. So in the next topic, we'll be talking about how to control the pests. So I want to say a very big thank you for your patience, and I hope by next week we'll go further and have another wonderful time. Thank you.